Hello all, welcome to today's class and I'm Sushma D, your tutor from GFGC Shira. Today we shall be discussing an inspiring poem by the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Before we start analyzing this poem, as usual, let us know about the poet and the poem. So, in today's session, I'll be giving you an introduction regarding the poet and the poem. He is H.W. Longfellow. His complete name is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. His period is 1807 to 1882. Note on the poet. H.W. Longfellow was born in Portland, Massachusetts on February 27, 1807 as the second son into an established New England family of 8 children. His father, Stephen Longfellow, was a prominent lawyer and later a member of Congress. Longfellow attended private schools and the Portland Academy. He was graduated from Bowdoin College in 1825. He studied and learned modern languages French, Spanish and Italian in Europe for 3 years but refused to settle down to a regimen of scholarship at any university. He traveled all over Europe before he beginning his career as a professor. In 1829, he returned to the United States to be a professor and librarian at Bowdoin. He wrote and edited textbooks, translated poetry and prose, and wrote essays on French, Spanish, and Italian literature. But he felt isolated. When he was offered a professorship at Harvard with another opportunity to go abroad, he accepted and set forth for Germany in the year 1835. On this trip, he visited England, Sweden, and the Netherlands. In 1835, saddened by the death of his first wife, whom he had married in the year 1831, he settled at Heidelberg, where he fell under the influence of German Romanticism. Simple themes, the spirit of joy, optimism, and faith in the goodness of life is the main characteristics of his poetry. His first major poetry collections were Voices of the Night, published in the year 1839, and Ballads and Other Poems, published in the year 1841. He retired from teaching in the year 1854 to focus on his writing. He translated the works from foreign languages also. Some of his major works are The Song of Hiawatha, Paul Revere's Ride, Evangeline. Longfellow's immense popularity helped raise the status of poetry in his country, and he played an important part in bringing European cultural traditions to American audiences. He died on March 24, 1882 due to ill health. This is about a very popular and loved American poet, H.W. Longfellow. About the poem. A Psalm of Life, it is written by H.W. Longfellow. His period is 1807 to 1882. This poem was first published in Voice of the Night in 1838. A psalm is a religious or sacred song or hymn, in particular any of those contained in the biblical book of Psalms and used in Christian and Jewish worship. But here, the meaning of a psalm of life is a song of life where the poet glorifies life and its possibilities. So we could say that glorification of life with respect. It is an invocation to mankind to follow the path of righteousness, the right way to live this life. So, this poem shows the poet's admirable attitude towards life and the keynote of the poem. The poem is didactic in tone and it comprises of 9 stanzas. This poem was inspired by a conversation between Longfellow and a fellow professor. As such, the poem is framed as a dramatic monologue spoken by the heart of a young man to a psalmist. The poem deals with the subject of life and the possibilities it offers to human beings. It also encourages readers to live life to its fullest core. Since its publication, it has gained immense popularity across the globe on the account of its subject matter. Life and hope are the 2 major themes of the poem. The poet has incorporated these themes using a plenty of literary elements. He says we should not mourn the past. Instead, we should live in the present moments of life to the fullest core. He compares life with a battle, saying that we should act like a hero and surmount every obstacle that comes in our way. Throughout the poem, he intends to encourage the readers and urges them not to let the precious moments of life go in vain. He instructs them to keep a balance between happiness and sorrows and crave a better future for themselves. Literary devices are the tools that enable the writers to present their ideas, emotions, and feelings, and also help the readers to understand those in a more profound way. H.W. Longfellow has also used some of the literary devices in this poem. The literary devices employed in this poem are as follows: personification, assonance, alliteration, allusion, imagery, anaphora, and paradox. You all know the definition of personification. Personification means attributing the quality of a living being to a non-living being. So personification is to give human qualities to inanimate subjects. So in this particular poem, the poet has personified the soul in the last line of the second stanza. The line runs like this: was not spoken of the soul. So in this line, he has used Saul by attributing a human quality as if the soul is human and it can speak. Okay, this is personification. The next two figures of speech, that is assonance and alliteration. These two are generally used to provide rhythmic effect to the poem. So generally used for rhythm. So what is assonance? The repetition of vowel sounds more than once in a single line. So if the vowel sound is repeated more than once in a single line, then that is identified as assonance. Alliteration means repetition of consonantal sounds more than once in a single line. If at all the consonantal sound is repeated more than once in a single line, then that could be identified as alliteration. So the poet has effectively used these two figures of speech in order to provide rhythmic effect to the poem. To quote the line where assonance has been used, lives of great men all remind us, where the vowel E sound has been repeated more than once in this particular line. And moving on to the next line, still achieving, still pursuing. Here the vowel sound I has been used more than once in this particular line. And moving on to alliteration. So in the line, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, where the consonantal sound R is repeated more than once in that particular line. Okay, so such usages we are going to see in this particular poem by the poet H.W. Longfellow. And the next figure of speech is allusion. What is allusion? It is an implied or indirect reference to a person or event or thing or to a part of another text is identified as allusion. Okay. So Longfellow has used this device in the opening line of the poem, such as, tell me not in mournful numbers. Okay, in this particular line, numbers is actually giving a reference to the chapters and sections of the Bible. Right? So this is allusion. Taking a reference of a part of another text has been used in the first line of the poem. Next figure of speech is imagery. Imagery is used to make the readers perceive things with their five senses. So once we read that particular line, definitely we are going to perceive the description given by the poet by employing our five senses. So Henry has used visual imagery to conjure mental images such as in the world's broad field of battle and footprints on the sands of time. So here battle has been compared. And of course, even in the line, footprints on the sands of time. What an imagination. Yeah. So we are going to sense the descriptive imagination which has been provided by the poet by using our senses. The next figure of speech used in the poem is anaphora. So anaphora, it actually refers to the repetition of a word or expression in the poem. So in this particular poem, so H.W. Longfellow has repeated the word life to emphasize his feelings about life in the 5th line, where it is stated as life is real, life is earnest. So here life has been repeated twice in that particular line in order to emphasize the feeling of the poet about life. And the last figure of speech used in the poem is paradox. A paradox is a statement that may seem contradictory yet can be true, or at least makes sense. That is called as paradox. Even though the statement actually seems very contradictory, but when we just go on reflecting upon that particular line, definitely it is going to make some sense and it appears true before our eyes. So in this particular poem, the poet has used this device in the 4th line, where it's stated as, and things are not what they seem. So here he talks about the appearances versus reality. Right? So by employing all these literary devices, the poet has created a magical, optimistic approach towards life. And only because of that reason, this poem has become really popular. So I hope that with this introduction, we can fully explore and enjoy the poem A Psalm of Life. So without wasting much of our time, let us start reading the poem A Psalm of Life by H.W. Longfellow. Here we go. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream, for the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. So the poem begins with an allusion, mournful numbers, which means sorrowful verses. Here, the numbers refer to the chapters and sections of the Bible. And the verb tell is an imperative manner. And the very first sentence strikes the positive keynote of the poem. It also indicates that the poet is going to give us some instructions on what this life actually is and how we should take it. The poet asks us not to tell him in a sorrowful verses that life is hollow and a meaningless dream. So in the first 2 lines, Longfellow slams the pessimists who sing melancholic songs or write sad poems or thinks that nothing can be achieved in this life. He is too optimistic about life. According to the poet, a person who spends all his time sleeping is already dead. Such worthless examples of life often misguide others. And he assures that life is not so shady or worthless as it looks like, and it has much more potential than we think of. So, in the first stanza, the poet begins the poem with more of positive note connected to life. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. So, here in the second stanza, the poet uses the figure of speech anaphora stating life is real, life is earnest. Life has been used here twice in a single line in order to express his feelings connected towards life. This line actually conveys the poet's positive attitude towards life. According to him, life is real and serious, not baseless or useless. So we should not take this life lightly. To him, grave is not the ultimate goal of life. Everyone who is born should die, but grave should not become the ultimate goal of one's life. Life does not end with death. He wants to indicate that our works remain in this world even after our death. He thinks, dust thou art, to dust thou returnest. You are made of dust and you will go back to dust after death. It is purely spoken of the body and it is not applicable to the soul. So, the poet makes it very clear that he believes in the existence of the soul after our death. He has personified the soul in the last line of this particular stanza. Was not spoken of the soul, as if the soul is human and it can speak. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow find us farther than today. The third stanza tells about the ideal way of living. So in this particular stanza, the poet is intended to talk about the ideal way of living. The poet suggests that neither enjoyment nor sorrow should be our ultimate aim or way of life. So he has used assonance and alliteration to provide the rhythmic effect to the poem. He has repeated the na sound more than once in this particular line, and o sound has been repeated more than once in this particular line. He means to say that in an ideal life, there should be both enjoyment and sorrow in a balanced way. But that is not crucial. The most important thing is to work and work diligently so that we can always be a better learned, better skilled, and better mannered human beings with every passing day. The poet in this particular poem doesn't want us to waste even a single day. We should crave for going forward farther each day in our journey of life. What an optimistic thought towards life. So let me end today's session here, and I will continue the next part of the poem in my next class. I hope that you guys are enjoying the poem. Thank you all.